So Professor Brooks, we have collected some questions for you. So indeed, so that was a comprehensive glimpse of the global challenges in terms of the environmental health perspective and the potential solutions you talked about tackling them. So so we would like to have your thoughts upon pre and post 2020 in light of the global pandemic. What is your view on the associated environmental issues?
Yeah, I think I have lots of thoughts on that question. I think it's a very important and obviously a timely question. Systems matter. If we think about the work that we do, sometimes we're not always connecting the complexity of the systems that influence what we engage, how we engage it, and how even systems intersect with other systems. So when a pandemic or various types of hazards, maybe it's a chemical spill, maybe it's a cyclone, or as we in the United States sometimes experience, and even Maggie Mills is familiar with the tornadoes that sometimes come through the United States. The point is, these disruptions, like the current global pandemic or the cyclone, disrupt systems. Now, what do I mean by systems? Well, clearly the healthcare system, right? Yeah. The way that we deliver healthcare services is one of those. But what about food, right? Water and wastewater. You think about the way that the pandemic interfaces with some of the topics that I'm describing today. We know that lockdowns, on one hand, may have provided air quality benefits in some parts of the world. We also know that it created an increase of consumption in various types of products, which stressed supply chains like personal protective equipment. The increase in terms of trying to protect public health has resulted in increased solid waste from the PPE. We think about then the essential services or the functions that environmental scientists, engineers, health professionals are engaging. How has their routine work and research been disrupted by the pandemic? On one hand, perhaps the pandemic has created opportunities to understand the disruption of systems and how this, forgive me for saying, but it's almost like a global experiment that we're all experiencing.
Yeah.
Right. So yes. How does the systems disruption allow us to understand the interworkings of the system? But then also, it's created major challenges where people could not do their work. Perhaps their staff had illnesses, or the supply chains for their research activities were delayed. And so it's a really good question. It's certainly very timely and relevant, and I'm grateful to receive it. But when I hear a question like that, again, I think about systems, and I think about, are we still able to do what we need to do for society to function, so that environmental science and technology is operating as society needs us, right? Are we being flexible to address the challenge that's meeting us at hand, but not forgetting about all of the other essential work that needs to go on, from research to even the practice of keeping our water safe and our food safe to eat? Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Professor Brooks, for beautifully explaining your thoughts. And again, in line with that question, we have one more question or thought coming up. So it's like, out of all the current environmental problems that we see around, which one do you think should be the top priority in terms of addressing?
Well, we all have preferences, you know. If you think about the value of these types of exercises, I have my ideas, you have yours. Inherently, everyone on on the call would have their preferences. Look, I try to remind my students about the threes, right? So we can go about 3 minutes without air. We can go about 3 days without water, and we can go, 3 weeks to 30 days without food, although it becomes kind of challenging. And so the topics that we're engaging to here today as it relates to public health, human welfare, it's really important. And oftentimes society can lose track or maybe even the appreciation of how important just things like air and water and food are. Without a doubt, the priority that I would place in some of these research questions would depend upon the region, depend
Yeah.
upon the major stresses to the region. On one hand, I tend to be fascinated by the process of urbanization and how urbanization, the cities, the mega cities especially, are stressing resources, but also presenting unprecedented opportunities for innovation, for smarter, dare I say, management that is more sustainable as we go forward. So I tend to gravitate, much like perhaps you will, to questions that are identified like these from our community, to those that are most interesting to me. So thank you for the question.
Yes, yes, Professor Brooks. Yeah, because it depends upon the kind of the global scenario and the community that is having different kind of challenges. So definitely, it varies from place to place. So now we have one more question. When we talk about harmful toxic chemicals in water systems, what has been the most efficient and scalable purification and detoxification technique till now?
Well, again, I think you get into a really great question, but but chemicals are different, right? And so if we're thinking about well, let's just highlight some kind of high profile examples from the United States. Um, you probably have heard about some of the water challenges in Flint, Michigan. So we had um, a lead issue. You're also seeing papers in our journal published on these types of issues, metals, lead, other issues, have been around for a long time. But in fact, in the last year, we've published papers on point of use technologies to address areas where things like lead in water is a problem. We've also, in ES&T letters, published papers in the last year that examine point of use technology application and relative effectiveness for the PFAS, or per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. And so those technologies tend to not all be the same. There are some that are more generally applicable. But then, so I would encourage you to check out some of our recent content in the journal, because depending upon the types of contaminants that you're interested in, or maybe the priority is for a specific area, then you have to think about scalability, the size of the population served. Is this a small town or a village, or is this a city with 10 million people or more?
Yeah.
Thank you for the question. Excellent question.
Thank you, Professor Brooks. So we are coming to the end of the session. We have 2 more minutes left. So I'll take one or two questions. So that's I must say that you have covered this in the talk, but again, it would be good to emphasize more upon that. So could you provide an example of the best sustainable innovation made in your opinion to prevent such kind of environmental problems? An
Yeah,
example.
yeah. Well, there are many, and I think that's one thing that's exciting about environmental science and technology. Think about the name, right? We're trying to understand the world, but we're also trying to provide innovation to be able to address problems. Now, we're trying to address problems that are already out there, right? Um, but for me, I gravitate, and again, I'll plug my colleague, Professor Julie Zimmerman's talk that's coming up on the 26th of March on designing a green chemistry future. I do hope that you'll also attend her presentation. I'm sure it's going to be quite interesting to you. But But I tend to embrace the public health approach. Can we be more protective? Right? So think
Yeah.
about the analogy of someone standing on the edge of the cliff. Are you going to prefer the ambulance
Yeah.
wait at the bottom of the cliff to take them to the hospital when they fall? Or would you prefer to build the fence so the person never falls to begin with?
Yeah.
So I gravitate to some of the types of interventions that, that really can help us avoid problems in the future. I mentioned things like sustainable molecular design, designing molecules that are inherently less hazardous but maintain their intended functions. So here's an example of tremendous technological innovation that reduces the risk to public health and environment, which provides also opportunities for more sustainable economic development.